The wagon exploded into flames so fast that nobody standing in the dusty street of Tucson, Arizona, had time to process what they were witnessing before the fire consumed the entire wooden frame. And inside that inferno, a woman in white screamed for her life. Kieran Foster had been watering his horse at the trough outside the general store when he heard the crack of splintering wood followed by that blood-curdling scream. His head snapped toward the sound, and his body moved before his mind could catch up. The wagon sat in the middle of the street, flames licking up the sides with a hunger that seemed unnatural in its speed. Black smoke billowed into the clear Arizona sky, and through the haze he could see her, a figure in white, trapped in the back of the burning wagon, her dress already catching fire at the hem. People were shouting, running toward the wagon with buckets, but Kieran knew they would be too late. The fire was spreading too quickly, fed by something more than just dry wood under the merciless June sun of 1878. He dropped his horse's reins and sprinted toward the wagon, his boots pounding against the hard, packed earth. The heat hit him like a physical wall when he got within 10 feet, but he did not slow down. He could hear her coughing now, choking on the smoke, her screams turning into desperate gasps. Kieran yanked his bandana up over his nose and mouth and grabbed the edge of the wagon's gate. The metal burned his palms, but he gritted his teeth and hauled himself up into the inferno. The smoke was so thick he could barely see, and the heat was like being inside an oven. He stumbled forward, his eyes watering, and then he saw her clearly for the first time. She was young, probably no more than 23 or 24, with long dark hair that tumbled around her shoulders. Her wedding dress was elaborate, all lace and silk, and it was burning. She looked at him with wild, terrified eyes as he reached for her. "I have got you," he shouted over the roar of the flames. "Hold on to me." Her hands clutched at his shirt, and he scooped her up into his arms, feeling the heat of the fire against his back. The wagon groaned beneath them, the wood cracking and splitting. Kieran turned and jumped, landing hard on the ground with her still in his arms. He rolled, putting out the flames on her dress with his own body, and then scrambled to his feet, carrying her away from the wagon. Behind them, the entire structure collapsed in on itself with a thunderous crash, sending sparks and embers flying into the air. The crowd that had gathered rushed forward, but Kieran kept moving, carrying the woman toward the doctor's office at the end of the street. She was coughing violently, her face smudged with soot, her beautiful dress ruined and burned. But she was alive. He could feel her heart pounding against his chest, could hear her gasping for breath. "Someone get Doc Henley," he shouted as he kicked open the door to the office. The doctor, a grizzled man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his desk in surprise. "What in the blazes?" Doc Henley exclaimed, but he was already moving, clearing off the examination table with a sweep of his arm. Kieran laid the woman down gently, and she immediately curled onto her side, coughing so hard her whole body shook. "Wagon fire," Kieran said shortly. "She was trapped inside. She breathed in a lot of smoke." Doc Henley was already examining her, checking her pulse, looking at the burns on her hands and arms. "You did good, Foster," he said without looking up. "Another minute and she would have been gone. Miss, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name?" The woman's coughing subsided enough for her to speak, though her voice was hoarse and raw. "Catherine," she whispered. "Catherine Everett." "All right, Miss Everett," Doc Henley said gently. "You are going to be just fine. You have got some burns and you breathed in a lot of smoke, but nothing that will not heal. I need you to stay still while I treat these burns." Kieran stepped back, suddenly aware that his hands were shaking. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue was fading, leaving him feeling shaky and sick. He looked down at his palms, which were red and blistered from grabbing the hot metal gate. Doc Henley noticed and pointed at a chair. "Sit down before you fall down, Foster. And let me see those hands when I am done with Miss Everett." Kieran sat, watching as the doctor worked. Catherine Everett's eyes were closed now, her breathing still labored but steadier. Even covered in soot and with her hair singed at the ends, she was beautiful. He found himself wondering about the wedding dress, about who she had been on her way to marry, about why she had been alone in that wagon. The door burst open, and a stout woman with iron-gray hair bustled in, her face red with exertion. "Catherine! Oh, my lord, Catherine!" She rushed to the examination table, and Catherine's eyes opened. "Aunt Margaret," she whispered. "Oh, child, I saw the whole thing from the hotel window," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought you were going to die. Thank God for this brave man." She turned to Kieran, and he saw that her hands were trembling. "Thank you. Thank you for saving her life." Kieran nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His throat felt tight, and he was not sure if it was from the smoke or from something else entirely. Doc Henley finished bandaging Catherine's burns and helped her sit up slowly. "You need to rest," he told her firmly. "Your lungs need time to recover from the smoke. No talking more than necessary, and you need to stay in bed for at least a few days." "But the wedding," Catherine said, and then she started coughing again. Margaret's face darkened. "There is not going to be any wedding, Catherine, not after what I saw." Kieran looked between the two women, confused. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but whether from pain or emotion he could not tell. "What happened to the wagon?" Margaret demanded, looking at Kieran. "How did it catch fire so fast?" "I do not know, madam," Kieran said honestly. "I was watering my horse when I heard the noise. The whole thing went up in seconds. It was not natural." "It certainly was not," Margaret said grimly. "That wagon belonged to Harold Pritchard, the man Catherine was supposed to marry this afternoon, and I saw him, standing outside the hotel watching the fire burn. He was not trying to help. He was just watching." Catherine made a sound that might have been a sob or might have been another cough. Doc Henley shot Margaret a warning look. "That is enough talk for now. Miss Everett needs rest, and so does Foster here. Let me treat his hands, and then you can take Catherine to the hotel." But Margaret was not finished. "Harold Pritchard set that fire," she said flatly. "I know he did, and I know why. He found out about the inheritance." "Aunt Margaret, please," Catherine whispered, but her aunt ignored her. "Catherine's father died 2 months ago," Margaret explained, looking at Kieran as if he needed to understand. "Left her everything, including a very profitable ranch outside of town. Harold Pritchard courted her fast, swept her off her feet, and she agreed to marry him. But what she did not know until yesterday was that Harold has been drowning in gambling debts. He owed money to some very dangerous men. The marriage was never about love. It was about getting his hands on her property." "That does not explain the fire," Doc Henley said, frowning as he examined Kieran's burned palms. "It does if you know what Catherine told him last night," Margaret said. "She told him she wanted a prenuptial agreement, wanted to keep the ranch in her own name." He smiled and said, of course, whatever she wanted, but I saw his eyes. They were cold as ice. Kieran felt a chill run down his spine despite the lingering heat from the fire. "You think he tried to kill her?" "I think if she had died in that fire, as his bride-to-be, he could have argued that he had a claim to her estate," Margaret said. "And even if he could not, a dead woman cannot keep a ranch running. The property would have to be sold, and Harold has friends on the town council who would have made sure he got first bid." "That is a serious accusation," Doc Henley said quietly. "It is the truth," Margaret replied. "And I intend to tell the sheriff exactly what I saw." Kieran looked at Catherine, who had gone very pale. She was staring at her bandaged hands, and he could see her shoulders shaking. Whether she believed her aunt's theory or not, she had just lost everything she thought she knew about the man she was supposed to marry. Doc Henley finished bandaging Kieran's hands and stepped back. "You both need to keep these clean and dry," he said. "Foster, you were lucky. Another few seconds in that heat and you would have been burned much worse. Miss Everett, I meant what I said about rest. Your aunt can take you to the hotel now, but I want to see you again tomorrow." Margaret helped Catherine to her feet, supporting her as she swayed. Catherine looked at Kieran, and their eyes met for a long moment. "Thank you," she said softly. "You saved my life." "Yes, madam," Kieran said, feeling his face grow warm. "I am just glad I was there." She gave him a small, sad smile, and then Margaret was leading her out the door. Kieran watched them go, feeling strangely bereft. He had known this woman for all of 10 minutes, and yet something about her had gotten under his skin. Doc Henley was cleaning up the examination table, humming tunelessly under his breath. "You did a brave thing today, Foster," he said without looking up. "Foolish, maybe, but brave." "I could not just stand there and watch her burn," Kieran said. "No, I suppose you could not." Doc Henley glanced at him. "You planning to stick around town for a few days? Those hands need to be checked." Kieran had been planning to head out to his claim in the morning. He had been prospecting in the hills outside Tucson for the past 6 months, looking for silver, and he had finally found a vein that looked promising. Every day he spent in town was a day someone else might stumble on his find, but he found himself nodding. "I can stay a few days." "Good. Come back tomorrow and I will change those bandages." Doc Henley paused. "And Foster, if Margaret Hartley is right about Harold Pritchard, you might have made yourself an enemy today. Be careful." Kieran left the doctor's office and walked back to where he had left his horse. The animal was still standing patiently by the trough, and Kieran patted its neck with his bandaged hand. The wagon was nothing but a smoking ruin now, a black skeleton in the middle of the street. A crowd had gathered around it, and Kieran could hear them talking in low, excited voices. Fires were always news in a town built mostly of wood, but a bride nearly burning to death on her wedding day was something else entirely. He led his horse to the boarding house, where he sometimes stayed when he was in town, and paid for a room for the night. His hands were throbbing now, the pain settling in as the shock wore off. He washed the soot off his face as best he could with one hand, then lay down on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. He kept seeing Catherine Everett's terrified eyes, kept feeling the weight of her in his arms as he carried her out of the flames. He had saved people before. It was what you did in the West, where survival often depended on neighbors helping neighbors. But this felt different somehow. This felt personal. The sun was setting when someone knocked on his door. Kieran sat up, wincing at the stiffness in his shoulders, and opened it to find the sheriff standing in the hallway. Sheriff Tom Morrison was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and eyes that missed nothing. "Foster," he said by way of greeting. "Got a minute?" "Sure, Sheriff." Kieran stepped back to let him in. Morrison took off his hat and turned it in his hands, a gesture Kieran recognized as the sheriff working through something complicated. "I have been hearing stories about what happened today," Morrison said. "About you pulling Catherine Everett out of that burning wagon. That was a hell of a thing you did." "Anyone would have done the same," Kieran said. "That is not true, and you know it," Morrison said bluntly. "Most people would have stood there and watched, but that is not why I am here. I have been talking to Margaret Hartley, and she has some interesting theories about how that fire started. She thinks Harold Pritchard did it. She does. And the thing is, I am inclined to believe her." Morrison sighed and sat down on the room's single chair. "I have been keeping an eye on Pritchard for a while now. He has been getting in deep with some bad people. Gamblers, loan sharks. Word is he owes close to $10,000, and the men he owes it to are not the patient type. Kieran let out a low whistle. $10,000 was a fortune. So he needed Miss Everett's ranch. He needed it bad. And when she told him about the prenuptial agreement, he would have known the jig was up. A man that desperate might do something crazy. Morrison looked at Kieran. The problem is, I cannot prove it. The wagon is destroyed. Even if there was evidence of how the fire started, it is gone now. And Pritchard has an alibi. Says he was inside the hotel the whole time, and he has got 3 of his friends who will swear to it. Margaret Hartley saw him watching. She did. But she saw him through a window, and he was standing in a public street. His lawyer would argue he had every right to be there, and that of course he would watch if there was a fire. It is not enough to arrest him on. Morrison rubbed his face tiredly. I wanted to warn you to be careful, Foster. If Pritchard did try to kill Catherine Everett and you stopped him from succeeding, he might hold a grudge. The man is desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. I can take care of myself, Kieran said. I am sure you can, but watch your back anyway. Morrison stood and put his hat back on. One more thing. Miss Everett is going to need protection. Margaret is staying with her at the hotel, but Margaret is 60 years old and not exactly intimidating. If you were thinking about sticking around town for a few days anyway, it might not be a bad idea to keep an eye on things. Kieran thought about Catherine's pale face, her terrified eyes. I can do that, he said. Morrison nodded, satisfied. Appreciate it, Foster. I will be keeping an eye on Pritchard, but I cannot be everywhere at once. He paused at the door. That was a brave thing you did today. Catherine Everett is alive because of you. Her father was a good man, and he would have been grateful. After the sheriff left, Kieran lay back down on the bed, but sleep was elusive. His mind kept replaying the events of the day, kept coming back to those few moments inside the burning wagon. He had felt something in that instant, something that went beyond just saving a life. It was as if time had slowed down, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, his whole world had shifted. He barely knew Catherine Everett. He had spoken maybe 10 words to her. But he could not stop thinking about her, could not stop wondering if she was all right, if she was scared, if she was sleeping or lying awake like he was. This is foolish, he told himself. She is a wealthy woman with a ranch and property. You are a prospector who lives in a tent half the year and might never find enough silver to amount to anything. Besides, she almost married someone today. The last thing she needs is some stranger mooning over her. But knowing something was foolish and being able to stop it were 2 different things. The next morning, Kieran went to the doctor's office to have his bandages changed. Doc Henley examined his hands and nodded approvingly. Healing well, he said. You were lucky, Foster. These could have been a lot worse. Has Miss Everett been in today? Kieran asked, trying to sound casual. Doc Henley gave him a knowing look but did not comment on it. She came by early this morning. Her lungs are still congested, but she is breathing easier. The burns on her hands and arms are superficial. She will be fine in a week or 2. Kieran felt relieved out of all proportion to the news. That is good to hear. She asked about you, actually, Doc Henley said, wrapping fresh bandages around Kieran's palms. Wanted to know if you were all right, if your hands were badly burned. I told her you would be fine. She did. Doc Henley tied off the bandage and stepped back. That woman has been through hell, Foster. She almost died. She found out the man she was going to marry probably tried to kill her, and now she is stuck in this town with no idea who she can trust. She could use a friend. I am not exactly friend material, Kieran said. I spend most of my time alone in the hills digging in the dirt. Maybe that is exactly what she needs, Doc Henley said. Someone who does not want anything from her. From what Margaret tells me, every man in Catherine's life since her father died has been trying to get their hands on her property. You ever want something from a woman besides her money, Foster? Kieran thought about that. He had never been much for courting. His life was too uncertain, too transient. But he had known men who fell in love, who built lives with women, who seemed happy in a way that had nothing to do with money or property. I suppose I never thought about it much, he admitted. Well, maybe you should start thinking about it, Doc Henley said. Life is short, Foster, shorter than any of us think, and chances like this do not come along every day. Kieran left the doctor's office feeling unsettled. He walked down the main street of Tucson, his boots crunching on the hard, packed earth, his newly bandaged hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. The town was busy with the usual morning activity. Wagons rolled past, kicking up dust. Women in bonnets hurried between shops with baskets on their arms. Men stood in clusters outside the saloons, talking and smoking. He found himself walking toward the hotel without consciously deciding to do so. It was a two-story building with a wide front porch, one of the nicer establishments in town. He climbed the steps and went inside, where a clerk behind the desk looked up at him suspiciously. "Help you?" the clerk asked. "I am looking for Miss Catherine Everett," Kieran said. "Is she in?" The clerk's expression softened slightly. "You the fellow who pulled her out of that fire?" "Yes, sir." "Hold on." The clerk disappeared through a door behind the desk, and Kieran waited, feeling increasingly foolish. What was he even going to say to her? He had no reason to be here, no excuse for showing up at her hotel. But then the door opened again and Catherine herself appeared, and Kieran forgot whatever he had been worrying about. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her dark hair pulled back in a braid, and there were bandages on her hands and forearms. Her face was still pale, with shadows under her eyes, but she was smiling. "Mr. Foster," she said, and her voice was still hoarse but stronger than yesterday. "I was hoping I would see you again." "I wanted to check on you," Kieran said, then felt stupid for stating the obvious. "To make sure you were all right." "I am all right, thanks to you." She gestured toward the hotel's small sitting room. "Would you like to sit for a minute? I have been cooped up in my room all morning and I am desperate for company." They sat in two chairs by the window, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Kieran found himself studying her face, noticing details he had missed in the chaos of yesterday. She had green eyes, dark and deep like forest pools. There was a small scar on her chin, barely visible. Her hands, resting in her lap, were delicate and long-fingered despite the bandages. "I do not know how to thank you," Catherine said finally. "You risked your life for me, a complete stranger. That is not something I will ever forget." "You do not need to thank me," Kieran said. "I am just glad you are safe." "Sheriff Morrison came to see me this morning," Catherine said, and her voice dropped lower. "He told me what my aunt said to him, about Harold." She looked down at her hands. "I do not want to believe it. I do not want to think that someone I trusted, someone I was going to marry, would try to hurt me. But the more I think about it, the more things make sense. Little things Harold said, the way he kept pushing for a quick wedding, the way he always wanted to talk about my father's property." "I am sorry," Kieran said, and he meant it. He could not imagine what it would be like to discover that kind of betrayal. "The worst part is that I feel like a fool," Catherine continued. "I thought he loved me. I thought we were going to build a life together, but it was all a lie. He just saw me as a way to solve his problems." She looked up at Kieran, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. "How could I have been so blind?" "You were not blind," Kieran said firmly. "You were trusting. There is a difference. What he did, lying to you, trying to hurt you, that is on him, not you." Catherine wiped at her eyes with the back of her bandaged hand, then laughed shakily. "Listen to me, falling apart in front of you. You must think I am pathetic." I think you are brave, Kieran said. You almost died yesterday, and here you are, sitting up and talking to me instead of hiding in your room. That takes strength. She gave him a long, searching look. You are not what I expected, she said finally. What do you mean? I do not know. I suppose I expected someone rough, maybe someone who would want to be called a hero. But you are just kind. She smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look younger and lighter despite everything she had been through. Thank you, Mr. Foster, not just for saving my life, but for this. For sitting with me and making me feel less alone. You can call me Kieran, he said. And you are not alone. I will be in town for a few more days. If you need anything, or if you just want someone to talk to, you can find me. I would like that, Catherine said softly. I would like that very much. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easier than Kieran would have expected. Catherine told him about growing up on her father's ranch, about learning to ride before she could walk, about the way the desert looked at sunset when the sky turned red and gold. Kieran found himself telling her about prospecting, about the solitude of the hills, about the moment when you broke through rock and saw silver gleaming in the darkness. It sounds lonely, Catherine observed. It is, Kieran admitted, but it is also peaceful. Out there, you do not have to worry about what people think of you or what they want from you. It is just you and the land. I think I would like that, Catherine said wistfully. Everything about my life lately has been complicated. Everyone wants something from me. It would be nice to just be alone for a while. Being alone is not the same as being lonely, Kieran said. You can be alone and peaceful, or you can be surrounded by people and miserable. You are very wise, Kieran Foster, Catherine said with a small smile. I am not wise, Kieran said. I just spend a lot of time thinking. When he finally left the hotel, the sun was high in the sky, and his stomach was reminding him that he had not eaten since the previous evening. But he felt lighter than he had in months, maybe years. Something had changed between him and Catherine Everett in that hour of conversation. They had connected in a way that felt real and solid, like bedrock under shifting sand. Over the next several days, Kieran fell into a pattern. In the mornings, he would go to the doctor's office to have his bandages changed. Then he would find Catherine, either at the hotel or walking along the quieter streets of Tucson with her aunt. They would talk, sometimes for hours, about everything and nothing. She told him about her father, a gruff but loving man who had taught her to run a ranch and value honesty above all else. He told her about his own childhood, growing up on a small farm in Missouri, before heading west to seek his fortune. Did you find it? Catherine asked one afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the general store. Your fortune? Not yet, Kieran said, but I think I might be close. I found a vein of silver that looks promising. If it pans out, I could actually make something of myself. You are already something, Catherine said, and the way she looked at him made his heart skip. You do not need silver to prove your worth. That is easy to say when you have property and money, Kieran pointed out, but he was smiling. Is it? Catherine's expression grew serious. My property and money nearly got me killed. Sometimes I think about selling everything and just leaving, starting over somewhere new where nobody knows who I am or what I am worth. You could do that, Kieran said. Nothing is stopping you. Except that ranch was my father's legacy, Catherine said. He built it from nothing. Giving it up would feel like betraying his memory. She sighed. I do not know what to do, Kieran. I feel trapped. You are not trapped, Kieran said. You just have not found the right path yet, but you will. You are stronger than you think. She reached over and took his hand, her bandaged fingers curling around his. You make me feel strong, she said quietly. When I am with you, I feel like I can handle anything. Kieran looked down at their joined hands and felt something shift inside his chest. He had been trying not to think too hard about his growing feelings for Catherine, trying to tell himself it was just concern for someone he had saved. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. He was falling for her, falling hard and fast in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The problem was Harold Pritchard. The man had not been seen since the day of the fire, but Kieran could feel his presence like a shadow over the town. Sheriff Morrison had questioned him, but without evidence, there was nothing he could do. Pritchard was walking free, and everyone knew it. On the 5th day after the fire, Kieran was eating breakfast at a small restaurant when Sheriff Morrison slid into the seat across from him. The sheriff's face was grim. "We have got trouble," Morrison said without preamble. "I got word this morning that Pritchard is planning to leave town. He is settling his debts, packing his things. By tomorrow, he will be gone." "That might be for the best," Kieran said. "Get him away from Miss Everett, maybe, or maybe he is cutting his losses and planning one last try at getting what he wants." Morrison leaned forward. "The men Pritchard owes money to are not happy. They thought they were going to get paid when he married Catherine. Now that is not happening, and they want their money. If Pritchard cannot pay them, he is a dead man, and a desperate, doomed man might do something crazy." Kieran felt a chill run down his spine. "You think he might try to hurt her again?" "I think it is possible. I'm going to keep a watch on the hotel, but I wanted you to know. You have been spending a lot of time with Miss Everett. Keep your eyes open." That afternoon, Kieran found Catherine in the hotel's small garden, a patch of green behind the building where a few hardy plants struggled against the desert heat. She was sitting on a stone bench, staring at nothing, and she looked so lost that his heart ached. "Catherine," he said gently, and she looked up, her face brightening when she saw him. "Kieran, I was hoping you would come by." She patted the bench beside her, and he sat down, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I have been thinking about what you said about not being trapped. And I think you are right. I have been so focused on what I should do, what my father would have wanted, that I forgot to think about what I want." She turned to face him fully. "I do not want to stay in Tucson, Kieran. This town has too many bad memories now. But I do not want to sell the ranch either. It is profitable, and it is my home. So I have decided to hire a foreman to run it for me while I figure out what I really want to do with my life." "That sounds like a good plan," Kieran said. "There is more." Catherine took a deep breath. "I want to leave Tucson as soon as I am healed enough to travel, and I want you to come with me." Kieran stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What?" "Come with me," Catherine repeated, and now she was looking at him with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "I know it is crazy. I know we have only known each other for a few days. But Kieran, in those few days, you have shown me more kindness and honesty than anyone else in my life. You do not want my money or my property. You just want to talk to me, to be with me. And I want to be with you." "Catherine, I do not have anything to offer you," Kieran said, even though every part of him wanted to say yes. "I am a prospector. I live in a tent. I do not even know if my silver claim is going to amount to anything." "I do not care about any of that," Catherine said fiercely. "I have had wealth and property, and they nearly got me killed. What I want is someone who sees me, really sees me, not what I own. And you do. I know you do." Kieran wanted to argue, wanted to be practical and sensible, but when he looked at Catherine, all his objections seemed to melt away. She was right. They barely knew each other, but there was something between them that felt more real than anything he had ever experienced. Maybe it was because they had met in such extreme circumstances. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe it was just that simple, powerful thing that people called love. "Where would we go?" he asked, and her face lit up. "Anywhere. Everywhere. We could go to California, see the ocean, or north to the mountains, or we could just wander, going wherever the road takes us." She reached up and touched his face, her bandaged hand gentle against his cheek. I just want to be free, Kieran, and I want to be free with you." He covered her hand with his own, careful of her burns. "Are you sure? You barely know me. I could be a terrible person." "You ran into a burning wagon to save my life," Catherine said. "I think that tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Kieran leaned forward and kissed her, a soft, tentative kiss that tasted like hope and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, Catherine was smiling, and it was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Is that a yes?" she asked. "That is a yes," Kieran said, and kissed her again. They were so lost in each other that neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows at the side of the hotel. Harold Pritchard stood there, his hands clenched into fists, his face twisted with rage. He had lost everything: his chance at the ranch, his way out of his debts, his future. And it was all because of the man currently kissing Catherine Everett in the garden. Pritchard turned and walked away, his mind churning with dark thoughts. If he could not have Catherine's fortune, then he would make sure nobody else did either. That night, Kieran was walking back to the boarding house when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned just in time to see 3 men emerge from an alley. They were rough-looking, with hard eyes and cruel smiles, and Kieran recognized the type immediately. These were the men Pritchard owed money to. "You Foster?" the biggest one asked. He had a scar running down one cheek and his hand rested on the gun at his hip. "I am," Kieran said carefully. His own gun was back at the boarding house. He had not thought he would need it for a short walk through town. "We have got a message for you from Mr. Pritchard," the scarred man said. "He wants you to stop seeing Catherine Everett. Says if you do not, there is going to be trouble." "I do not take orders from Pritchard," Kieran said. The man's smile widened, showing yellowed teeth. "That is too bad. See, Mr. Pritchard owes us a lot of money. He cannot pay us, but he promised us something else if we take care of his little problem. Namely, you." Kieran tensed, ready to fight or run, whichever became necessary. But before any of them could move, a voice rang out from behind the men. "I would not do that if I were you." Sheriff Morrison stepped into the light, his gun drawn and pointed at the 3 men. Behind him were 2 deputies, also armed. "Evening, boys," Morrison said pleasantly. "I have been expecting you. Word around town is that you have been making threats. I do not take kindly to that kind of thing in my town." The scarred man's hand moved away from his gun. "We were not doing nothing, Sheriff, just having a friendly conversation." "That is funny because it did not sound friendly to me," Morrison said. "In fact, it sounded like you were threatening Mr. Foster here, and that is a crime, so you have got 2 choices. You can leave Tucson tonight and never come back, or you can spend the next few months in my jail." "What is it going to be?" The 3 men exchanged glances. "We will leave," the scarred man said finally. "Smart choice. And you can tell Harold Pritchard that if he has got a problem with Mr. Foster, he can come see me about it. I've got some questions for him anyway." Morrison kept his gun trained on the men until they had backed away and disappeared into the night. Once they were gone, the sheriff holstered his weapon and turned to Kieran. "You all right?" "I am fine. Thanks to you." Kieran let out a shaky breath. "How did you know?" "I have been having you followed," Morrison admitted. "I told you Pritchard was dangerous. I wanted to make sure he did not try something stupid. Looks like I was right to be worried." "He is not going to give up, is he?" "No," Morrison said grimly. "A man like that, backed into a corner, he is liable to do anything, which is why I think Miss Everett's plan to leave town is a good one. The sooner you 2 get out of Tucson, the safer you will both be." Kieran thought about Catherine's proposal, about heading out into the unknown together. It still seemed crazy, but maybe crazy was exactly what they needed. "We will leave as soon as she is well enough to travel," he said. "Good. In the meantime, I will keep an eye on Pritchard and Foster. Be careful, watch your back." The next morning, Kieran went to the hotel early. Catherine was in the dining room having breakfast with her aunt, and she smiled when she saw him, but Margaret Hartley's expression was troubled. "Mr. Foster," Margaret said as he approached, "Catherine was just telling me about her plan to leave Tucson, and about you going with her." "Yes, madam," Kieran said, bracing himself for an argument, but Margaret surprised him. "I think it is a good idea," she said. "This town is not safe for Catherine anymore, and she is going to need someone to look after her. You have proven you can do that." "Aunt Margaret, I do not need looking after," Catherine protested, but she was smiling. "Everyone needs looking after sometimes," Margaret said firmly. She looked at Kieran. "You are a good man, Mr. Foster, I can see that, and I can see the way you look at my niece. Just promise me you will keep her safe." "I promise," Kieran said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They spent the next few days preparing for the journey. Catherine hired a foreman for her ranch, a weathered cowboy named Jake Murphy, who had worked for her father for years and knew the land inside and out. She arranged for her aunt to return to her home in Santa Fe, and she bought supplies for the road, traveling clothes and camping gear, and everything they would need for life on the move. Kieran sold his prospecting equipment and his claim, even though it pained him to give up the silver he had found. But Catherine was more important than any amount of precious metal. He bought a sturdy horse and a pack mule, and made sure they had plenty of ammunition for their rifles. On the morning they were set to leave, Kieran went to the boarding house to collect his few belongings. He was packing his saddlebags when he heard a commotion outside. He looked out the window and saw smoke rising from the direction of the hotel. His blood ran cold. Not again. Please, not again. He grabbed his gun and ran, his boots pounding on the wooden sidewalk. Other people were running too, all heading toward the hotel. As he got closer, he could see flames in the windows of the second floor, right where Catherine's room was. Kieran burst through the front door of the hotel to find chaos. The clerk was shouting for water, guests were running down the stairs, and smoke was already filling the building. He grabbed a woman in a nightgown. "Catherine Everett, where is she?" "Still upstairs." The woman gasped. "She went back for something." Kieran did not wait to hear more. He took the stairs 3 at a time, covering his mouth with his bandana. The smoke was thick, making his eyes water and his lungs burn. He had been in a fire once before, 5 days ago, and the memory of it made his heart pound. But Catherine was up here somewhere, and he would walk through hell itself to get to her. He found her in her room trying to drag a heavy trunk toward the door. Flames were licking up the walls and part of the ceiling had already collapsed. When she saw him, relief flooded her face. "Kieran." "I could not leave it. My father's papers are in here. The deed to the ranch." "Leave it," Kieran said, but she shook her head stubbornly. "I cannot." He did not argue further. He grabbed one end of the trunk and together they hauled it into the hallway. But the stairs were already impassable, flames blocking their path. Kieran looked around desperately and saw a window at the end of the hall. He ran to it and looked out. They were on the second floor, maybe 12 feet up. There was a balcony on the saloon across the street, close enough to jump to if you were crazy enough to try. "Come on," he said, grabbing Catherine's hand. "Where are we going?" "Out the window. We are going to jump." Catherine looked at the gap between the buildings and went pale, but she did not argue. Kieran climbed out first, balancing on the narrow ledge outside the window. The flames were roaring behind them now, and the heat was intense. He reached back for Catherine, helping her out onto the ledge. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. They jumped together, sailing through the air for a heart-stopping moment before landing hard on the balcony across the street. Kieran felt his ankle twist and pain shot up his leg, but they were alive and out of the fire. Behind them, The hotel's roof collapsed with a groan, sending sparks flying into the morning sky. Sheriff Morrison was waiting for them when they climbed down from the balcony. His face was black with soot and his expression was murderous. "Pritchard," he said. "I saw him. He set the fire and ran. I have got men looking for him now." "Forget Pritchard," Kieran said. He was holding Catherine close, feeling her shake against him. "We are leaving today, right now." "That might be for the best," Morrison agreed. "But Foster, when we catch Pritchard, I am going to need you both to testify." "Send word to her ranch," Kieran said. "We will come back when it is safe." They left Tucson an hour later, riding out of town as the hotel burned behind them. Catherine sat on her horse with her father's trunk strapped to the pack mule, and Kieran rode beside her, his ankle throbbing but manageable. Neither of them looked back. They rode north, following the trails that led up into the mountains. The desert gave way to grassland, and then to pine forests as they climbed higher. They camped at night under the stars, and Kieran taught Catherine how to build a fire and cook over open flame. She was a quick learner, and she laughed more with each passing day, the shadows lifting from her eyes. "I feel free," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I can just be myself." "You are remarkable," Kieran said, watching the firelight dance across her face. "You have been through so much, and you just keep going." "I keep going because of you," Catherine said. She moved closer to him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. "You saved me, Kieran, not just from the fire, but from the life I was living. I was so lost before I met you, but now I know exactly where I want to be." "Where is that?" "Right here. With you." She turned and kissed him, and the kiss was different from their first one. It was deeper, more certain, full of promise and desire. They made love that night under the stars, and it was tender and sweet and perfect. Afterward, lying in Kieran's arms with the fire crackling nearby, Catherine felt a peace she had never known. This was what happiness felt like. Not money or property or social standing, but this simple, profound connection with another person. They wandered for weeks, following no particular path, going wherever their fancy took them. They saw elk grazing in mountain meadows and eagles soaring over canyons. They passed through small towns where nobody knew their names, and they worked odd jobs to earn money when they needed it. Kieran chopped wood and mended fences. Catherine helped at a general store and taught a farmer's daughter to read. They were happy in a way that seemed almost too good to be true. But reality came calling one afternoon when they stopped at a trading post to buy supplies. The owner, a grizzled man with one eye, gave them a strange look when Kieran paid with coins. "You folks from Tucson way?" the man asked. "We were," Kieran said cautiously. "Why, got a newspaper here from down that way. Thought you might want to see it." He pulled out a crumpled copy of the Tucson Gazette and pointed at the headline. "Big news." Kieran took the paper and read, his heart sinking. The headline said, "Harold Pritchard arrested for arson and attempted murder." The article went on to explain that Pritchard had been caught trying to flee to Mexico. When questioned, he had confessed to setting both fires, the one that destroyed the wagon and the one at the hotel. He claimed he had been desperate, that the men he owed money to had threatened to kill him if he did not pay up. He thought that if Catherine died, he could argue a claim to her estate as her intended husband, enough at least to settle his debts. "They are going to hang him," Catherine said quietly, reading over Kieran's shoulder. "He tried to kill you," Kieran said. "Twice. I know. And I know he deserves to be punished, but I cannot help feeling sad about it. He was not always a bad person, Kieran. The gambling, the debts, they turned him into someone desperate and cruel. It is a waste." Kieran pulled her close. "You have a kind heart," he said. "Too kind, maybe, but I love you for it." Catherine looked up at him, her eyes wide. "You love me." He realized what he had said, and for a moment he hesitated. But then he thought about everything they had been through together, everything they had shared, and he knew it was true. "Yes," he said simply. "I love you, Catherine Everett. I think I have loved you since the moment I pulled you out of that fire." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Kieran Foster. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Do not be scared," he said, kissing her forehead. "I am not going anywhere. I am yours for as long as you will have me." "Then I guess you are stuck with me forever," Catherine said, laughing through her tears. They married a week later in a small church in a town called Pine Ridge, high in the mountains of northern Arizona. The preacher was an ancient man with a long white beard, and his wife served as witness. Catherine wore a simple blue dress, and Kieran wore his cleanest shirt and his Sunday hat. There were no guests, no elaborate ceremony, just two people promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran kissed Catherine like it was the most natural thing in the world. And it was. She was his wife now, and he was her husband, and nothing in his life had ever felt more right. They stayed in Pine Ridge for a few months, renting a small cabin and working odd jobs. Kieran found work as a ranch hand, and Catherine got a job teaching at the local school. They saved their money, planning for the future but not in any hurry to move on. They were happy where they were. Winter came, blanketing the mountains in snow. Kieran chopped wood and kept the fire going in their cabin, and Catherine cooked hearty stews and baked bread. They spent long evenings reading by firelight, or playing cards, or just talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they would stand outside in the cold and look up at the stars, and Kieran would hold Catherine close and think about how lucky he was. In the spring, a letter arrived from Sheriff Morrison. Pritchard had been tried and convicted of 2 counts of attempted murder and arson. He had been sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. The sheriff also said that Catherine's ranch was thriving under Jake Murphy's management, and that if she ever wanted to return to Tucson, she would be welcomed with open arms. Catherine read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it away. "What do you think?" she asked Kieran. "Should we go back? Do you want to?" She thought about it. "Part of me does. That ranch was my father's dream, and it feels wrong to abandon it completely. But another part of me loves our life here. It is simple and peaceful, and we do not have to worry about what other people want from us." "We could do both," Kieran suggested. "We could go back to Tucson for part of the year, make sure the ranch is running well, and then come back here for the rest. Or we could settle on the ranch and visit here sometimes. There is no rule that says we have to choose just one place." Catherine smiled. "You are so wise, Kieran Foster. What did I do to deserve you? You almost burned to death in a wagon," he said, grinning. "And I happened to be in the right place at the right time." She laughed and swatted his arm. "That is not funny. It is a little funny." They decided to return to Tucson, but not right away. They stayed in Pine Ridge through the summer, soaking in the peace and beauty of the mountains. And in August, Catherine told Kieran that she was pregnant. He was stunned at first, then elated. He picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh and telling him to put her down before he made her dizzy. They sat up late that night, talking about names and nurseries and all the things they would teach their child. "You think we will be good parents?" Catherine asked, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I think we will figure it out," Kieran said. "Together." They left Pine Ridge in September, making the journey back to Tucson slowly and carefully, mindful of Catherine's condition. The town had changed in the months they had been gone. New buildings had gone up, replacing the ones lost in fires. The hotel had been rebuilt, bigger and better than before. And the people they passed on the street smiled and nodded, no longer looking at Catherine with pity or speculation. The ranch was exactly as Catherine remembered it, a sprawling property with good grazing land and a solid house that her father had built with his own hands. Jake Murphy greeted them warmly, reporting that the cattle were healthy and the finances were sound. He offered to stay on as foreman, and Catherine agreed gratefully. They settled into life on the ranch, making the house their own. Kieran built a crib and a rocking chair, and Catherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets. As her belly grew, Kieran found himself marveling at the miracle of it all. Less than a year ago, he had been alone, digging for silver in the hills, with no thought of family or future. Now he had a wife he adored and a child on the way. Their daughter was born on a cold February morning in 1879. The labor was long and difficult, and Kieran spent most of it pacing the floor while the midwife worked. But when he finally heard the baby's cry and was allowed into the room to meet her, all his fear and worry melted away. Catherine was exhausted but radiant, holding their tiny daughter wrapped in a blanket. "She is perfect," she whispered. Kieran looked down at the baby's small, wrinkled face and felt his heart expand in his chest. "She is perfect," he agreed. "What should we call her?" "I was thinking Rose," Catherine said. "Rose Margaret after my mother and my aunt." "Rose," Kieran said, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Rose, I am your father." The baby opened her eyes, dark like her mother's, and seemed to look right at him. And in that moment, Kieran Foster knew that he would do anything, face any danger, overcome any obstacle to keep his family safe and happy. Life on the ranch was good. Hard work, but good. Kieran took on more responsibility, learning the cattle business from Jake Murphy and eventually becoming a partner in the operation. Catherine ran the household, and when Rose was old enough, started teaching again at the school in town. They made friends, became respected members of the community, and built a life that was rich and full. Sheriff Morrison became a regular visitor to the ranch, often staying for dinner and playing with Rose, who adored him. Margaret Hartley came to visit every summer, bringing presents and stories and her sharp, loving presence. And Jake Murphy became like family, a gruff but kind man who spoiled Rose shamelessly. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kieran took Catherine on a picnic to a spot overlooking the ranch. It was sunset, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. They sat on a blanket, watching Rose chase butterflies in the grass nearby, and Catherine leaned against Kieran's shoulder. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "The day we met, all the time," Kieran admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I ever really knew you." "I think about how brave you were," Catherine said. "Running into that fire when everyone else was just standing there. You could have died. But I did not. We both made it out, and look at what we have now." He gestured at the ranch, at Rose, at the life they had built together. "It was worth every risk." "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked. "Giving up prospecting, settling down. I know you loved being out in the hills searching for silver." Kieran thought about that. It was true that he sometimes missed the solitude and the thrill of the search, but when he weighed that against what he had now, there was no comparison. "I found something worth more than silver," he said, pulling Catherine closer. "I found you, and Rose, and this life we have together. That is worth more than all the precious metals in the earth." Catherine kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of love and contentment. "I love you, Kieran Foster." "I love you too, Catherine Foster." They stayed on the blanket until the stars came out, with Rose eventually falling asleep between them, her small hand clutching her father's finger. And as Kieran looked up at the vast Arizona sky, he thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. He had come to Tucson looking for silver, never expecting to find anything more valuable. But fate, or God or simple chance had put him in the right place at exactly the right moment, and that moment had changed everything. The years passed, marked by small joys and occasional sorrows. Catherine's Aunt Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep when Rose was 7, and they made the journey to Santa Fe for the funeral. It was hard, losing one of the few family members Catherine had left, but Margaret had lived a long and full life, and she died knowing her niece was happy and safe. Jake Murphy eventually retired, handing over the foreman duties to a younger man but staying on in a small house they built for him on the edge of the property. He became Rose's favorite person after her parents, teaching her to ride and rope and all the skills a rancher needed. Sheriff Morrison retired too, but he remained a fixture in their lives, visiting often and telling stories about the old days. He never married, but he seemed content with his life, and he always said that watching Kieran and Catherine's family grow was one of his greatest pleasures. Rose grew into a bright, curious girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's steady nature. She loved the ranch and everything about it, and she announced at age 10 that she was going to be a rancher just like her parents. Kieran and Catherine could not have been prouder. When Rose was 12, Catherine gave birth to twin boys, much to everyone's surprise and delight. They named them James and John, and suddenly the house was full of noise and chaos and laughter. Kieran built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and Catherine juggled motherhood with running the ranch and teaching. It was a busy, sometimes exhausting life, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Kieran would often stand on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over his land, his wife beside him and his children playing in the yard, and feel a profound sense of gratitude. He had more than he had ever dreamed of having. On his 40th birthday, Catherine threw him a party at the ranch. All their friends came, along with half the town of Tucson. There was food and music and dancing, and Rose gave a speech about what a wonderful father he was that made Kieran's eyes sting with tears. Later, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Kieran and Catherine sat on the porch swing, rocking gently in the darkness. "You are 40 years old," Catherine said, smiling at him. "How does it feel?" "Old," Kieran said, but he was grinning. "You are not old. You are distinguished." She ran her fingers through his hair, which was starting to gray at the temples. "I like it. It makes you look wise." "I do not know about wise. Lucky, maybe." "We are both lucky," Catherine agreed. She rested her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then she said, "Do you remember what I said to you that day in the hotel garden when I asked you to come with me?" "I remember. You said you wanted to be free." "I did, and you gave me that freedom." "You gave me everything, Kieran. A family, a home, a life full of love. I cannot imagine what my life would have been like if you had not pulled me out of that fire." "You would have found your way," Kieran said. "You are strong enough to survive anything. Maybe, but I would not have been happy. Not like I am now." She lifted her head to look at him, and even in the darkness, he could see the love shining in her eyes. "Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for being exactly who you are." Kieran kissed her, a kiss that held 15 years of love and partnership and shared experiences. "You saved me too," he said when they pulled apart. "I just did not know I needed saving until I met you." They stayed on the porch swing until late into the night, talking and laughing and remembering. And when they finally went to bed, Kieran held Catherine close and thought about how far they had come from that burning wagon in the middle of a Tucson street. The ranch continued to prosper over the years. Rose took over more and more of the daily operations as she grew older, proving herself to be a natural rancher with a good head for business. The twins, James and John, were different from their sister, more interested in books and learning than cattle and horses, but they found their own ways to contribute to the family. When Rose was 21, she married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named Thomas who loved her fiercely and respected her independence. They built a house on the property and started their own family, and Kieran found himself becoming a grandfather at the age of 49. Holding his first grandchild, a squalling baby girl named Catherine after her grandmother, Kieran was struck by the passage of time. It seemed like only yesterday that he had been holding Rose for the first time, marveling at her tiny perfection. Now Rose was a mother herself, and he was an older man with gray hair and lines around his eyes. But Catherine, his Catherine, was still beautiful. Her hair had silver threads running through the dark now, and there were laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. But to Kieran, she looked exactly the same as she had that first day in the burning wagon. She was still the woman he loved more than life itself. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a huge party at the ranch. Their children and grandchildren were there, along with what seemed like everyone they had ever known. Jake Murphy, now in his 80s but still sharp as a tack, gave a rambling toast about how he had watched Kieran and Catherine build their life together, and it had been one of the great privileges of his life. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Kieran and Catherine found themselves alone in the barn, where they had slipped away to check on a mare who was due to foal any day. 25 years, Catherine said, leaning against the stall door. It does not seem possible. It does not, Kieran agreed. He came to stand beside her and she tucked herself against his side, fitting perfectly like she always had. But here we are, she echoed. With a ranch, 3 children and 2 grandchildren, not bad for a prospector and a runaway bride. Kieran laughed. Not bad at all. They stood in companionable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the horses shifting in their stalls and the distant music still playing at the house. Then Catherine said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently? If you had not been in town that day, or if someone else had saved me?" "No," Kieran said honestly, "because I do not think it would have gone differently. I think we were meant to find each other, Catherine. Whether you believe in fate or God or just dumb luck, I think we were always supposed to end up together." "I like that," Catherine said. "I like thinking that all the pain and fear and struggle led me to you, that it all had a purpose." It did, and the purpose was this. He gestured around them, meaning not just the barn but everything, the ranch, the family, the life they had built. All of this. Catherine turned to face him fully, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you, Kieran Foster. I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for 25 more and 25 after that." "That is a lot of years," Kieran said, smiling. "Not nearly enough," Catherine replied and kissed him. The mare foaled that night, delivering a healthy filly that Rose declared was the prettiest thing she had ever seen. And as Kieran stood in the barn watching his daughter and granddaughter coo over the newborn foal, with Catherine's hand warm in his, he thought about beginnings and endings and all the moments in between. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and difficult harvests. There were arguments and misunderstandings, moments of frustration and fear. But through it all, Kieran and Catherine had each other. And that, he had learned, was what mattered most. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. James went off to university in San Francisco, where he studied law, while John apprenticed himself to a doctor in Tucson. Rose and Thomas had 2 more children, and the ranch house was often full of the sound of young voices and running feet. Kieran and Catherine grew older gracefully, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love for each other never dimming. They took walks together every evening, following the familiar paths around the ranch, holding hands like young lovers. They sat on the porch swing and watched the sunsets, content in each other's company. And at night, they still fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful for another day together. Jake Murphy passed away peacefully at the age of 92, surrounded by the family that had adopted him as one of their own. They buried him on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree he had always loved, and Rose read a passage from the Bible while everyone cried. Sheriff Morrison followed a few years later, and his funeral was one of the biggest Tucson had ever seen. He had been a beloved figure in the town, and his loss was felt deeply. Kieran gave the eulogy, talking about Morrison's courage and integrity, and the friendship that had meant so much to him over the years. As Kieran grew older, he found himself thinking more and more about that day in 1878 when he had pulled Catherine from the burning wagon. It had been the single most important moment of his life, the moment that had set everything else in motion. Sometimes he would close his eyes and remember the heat of the flames, the sound of Catherine's screams, the weight of her in his arms as he carried her to safety. And he would think about how close he had come to not being there at all, to missing that moment, and it would make him shudder. But he had been there, and he had saved her. And because of that, they had lived a life together that was more beautiful and fulfilling than anything he could have imagined in his wildest dreams. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration that brought tears to both their eyes. The ranch was decorated with flowers and ribbons, and there was a feast that seemed to go on forever. Rose gave a speech about how her parents' love had been the foundation of her life, teaching her what marriage and partnership really meant. James and John presented them with a leather-bound book they had made, filled with photographs and memories from the past 50 years. And the grandchildren, 7 of them now ranging from age 3 to 28, performed a song they had written especially for the occasion. Kieran and Catherine sat side by side, holding hands and crying happy tears, overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. When it was their turn to speak, Kieran stood slowly, his joints aching but his heart full. 50 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I was a lonely prospector looking for silver. I thought wealth was measured in ounces of precious metal, but I was wrong. True wealth is measured in moments like this. In the family we have built, the love we have shared, the memories we have made. Catherine, you are my greatest treasure. You are my silver and my gold, and I would not trade a single moment of the life we have had together for all the riches in the world. Catherine stood and kissed him, and everyone cheered. Then it was her turn to speak, though her voice was shaky with emotion. I was lost when Kieran found me, she said. Lost and scared and headed for a life that would have destroyed me, but he saved me. Not just from the fire, but from loneliness and fear and a future without love. He has been my partner, my friend, my love for 50 years. And every single day, I have thanked God for the moment that brought us together. Kieran Foster, you are the love of my life, and I will love you until my last breath. There was not a dry eye in the house. The celebration continued late into the night with dancing and storytelling and laughter. And when it finally ended and everyone had gone home, Kieran and Catherine stood on the porch of the house they had shared for so many years, looking out at the land they had worked and loved. 50 years, Kieran said softly. It went by so fast. Too fast, Catherine agreed. But we made every moment count. They went inside and got ready for bed, moving slowly through the familiar rituals of nighttime. And when they finally lay down together, Catherine in Kieran's arms like she had been for thousands of nights before, they both felt a profound sense of peace. I am not afraid of dying, Catherine said suddenly, her voice quiet in the darkness. "When my time comes, I will be ready, because I have lived a full life. I have loved and been loved. I have raised children and watched them have children of their own. I have everything I could ever want." "I am not ready to lose you," Kieran said, his voice catching. "I do not know how to exist without you." "You will not have to," Catherine said. "I am going to live to be 100, and so are you. We have got at least another 30 years together." Kieran smiled in the darkness. "Promise." "I promise," Catherine said. "Now go to sleep, old man. We have got grandchildren coming to visit in the morning." They fell asleep holding each other, content and grateful for another day together, for 50 years of marriage, for a love that had started in fire and had burned bright and steady ever since. As it turned out, Catherine was wrong about living to be 100. She made it to 87 before her heart, which had been strong and steady for so many years, simply gave out one night in her sleep. Kieran woke up beside her as the sun was rising and knew immediately that she was gone. He held her for a long time, crying silently, before finally calling for his children. The funeral was huge, attended by everyone whose life Catherine had touched, which was almost everyone in Tucson. They buried her next to Jake Murphy under the cottonwood tree, and Kieran stood at her grave long after everyone else had left, talking to her like she could still hear him. "I do not know how to do this," he told her. "I do not know how to be without you." But he found a way, because that was what you did. You kept going, even when the person you loved most in the world was gone. His children rallied around him, making sure he ate and slept and did not spend all his time alone. Rose moved back into the main house for a while, bringing her youngest grandchild with her to keep Kieran company. The ranch continued to operate, now run primarily by Rose and her husband, with help from James's son, who had decided to come back to the land. Kieran spent his days sitting on the porch, watching the work he and Catherine had started continue without them, and he found comfort in that continuity. At night, he would lie in bed and talk to Catherine like she was still there. He would tell her about the grandchildren, about Rose's latest triumph in expanding the herd, about the weather and the price of cattle and all the small, ordinary things that made up a life. And sometimes in that space between waking and sleep, he could almost feel her beside him, her hand in his, her head on his shoulder. Kieran lived another 3 years after Catherine's death. They were quiet years, peaceful in their way, but he missed her every single day. He missed her laugh, her voice, the way she would look at him like he was the only person in the world. He missed the small rituals of their life together, the morning coffee, the evening walks, the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. On a warm May morning, Kieran woke up feeling different. Lighter somehow, like a weight he had been carrying for 3 years had suddenly been lifted. He got dressed slowly and made his way to the porch, where he sat in his favorite chair and watched the sun rise over the ranch. Rose found him there a few hours later, sitting peacefully with a small smile on his face. He had passed away as gently as Catherine had, slipping away without pain or struggle. And when Rose closed his eyes and kissed his forehead, she whispered, "Go find her, Daddy. She has been waiting for you." They buried Kieran next to Catherine under the cottonwood tree, and the whole town turned out for the funeral. The preacher talked about a life well lived, about love and sacrifice, and the bonds of family. Rose spoke about her father's courage and kindness, about how he had taught her to be strong and independent. And James read a letter Kieran had written years ago, to be opened after his death. In the letter, Kieran talked about the day he had pulled Catherine from the burning wagon, about how that single moment of courage had given him everything that mattered in life. He talked about the 57 years they had spent together, about the family they had raised and the love they had shared, and he ended with these words: "I was just a prospector looking for silver when I met Catherine. But what I found was infinitely more valuable. I found love. I found purpose. I found a reason to be brave and strong and better than I ever thought I could be. If you are reading this, then I am gone. But I want you to know that I lived a good life. I loved deeply and was loved in return. I worked hard and built something lasting. And when my time came, I was ready, because I knew I had done everything I was meant to do. So do not be sad for me. Celebrate instead. Celebrate the life I lived and the love I shared. And if you get the chance to run into a burning wagon to save someone you love, do not hesitate. Do it. Because that is what life is about. Being brave enough to love, to risk, to give everything you have for the people who matter. That is the only treasure worth seeking." There was not a dry eye at the funeral. And afterward, as the family gathered at the ranch house, Rose stood on the porch and looked out at the land her parents had loved and worked for so many years. Her own children and grandchildren were there, along with James and John and their families, 3 generations of Fosters continuing the legacy that had started with a cowboy and a burning wagon. "They had a good life," Thomas said, coming to stand beside his wife. "They had a great life," Rose corrected. "They had exactly the life they wanted. They loved each other, they raised a family, they built something that will last long after we are all gone. Not many people can say that." "No," Thomas agreed. "Not many people can." Inside the house, the children were laughing and playing, and the sound drifted out through the open windows. It was the sound of life continuing, of the family growing and changing and carrying on. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave this earth, Kieran and Catherine Foster were together again, their hands clasped, their love eternal, watching over the family they had created and the legacy they had left behind. The ranch continued to thrive for generations. Rose passed it down to her son, who passed it to his daughter, who passed it to her son, each generation adding their own touches but always remembering the couple who had started it all. The story of how Kieran had saved Catherine from the burning wagon became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But for those who had known them, who had seen the way Kieran and Catherine looked at each other even after 50 years of marriage, who had witnessed the deep and abiding love that had sustained them through all the trials and joys of life, there was no myth. There was only truth. The truth that love, real love, the kind that is brave and selfless and true, can transform everything. It can turn a lonely prospector into a devoted husband and father. It can turn a frightened bride into a strong and independent woman. It can build families and communities and legacies that last for generations. And it all started with a single moment of courage, when a cowboy ran into a burning wagon and pulled a woman in white from the flames, carrying her out as the fire rose around them. In that moment, 2 lives were saved, not just physically but spiritually. And from that moment, a love story unfolded that would be remembered and celebrated for decades to come. It was a love story forged in fire and tempered by time. A love story that proved that sometimes the greatest treasures are not found in the earth, but in the hearts of the people we meet along the way. And for Kieran and Catherine Foster, that moment when their eyes met in the burning wagon was the beginning of everything that mattered. It was the moment they found each other, and in finding each other, they found themselves. They found home. They found love. They found the life they were always meant to live together, until the very end and beyond.